hypersonics, but as was pointed out, all the enabling sensors and other capabilities that China's pursuing as well, because there's a variety of ways to deal with this capability, and it may not only be shooting down a missile, it may be disabling other aspects of their infrastructure. But to get into more detail would probably need to be in another setting, and I'd probably have to have the support of colleagues who have more of the technical background.
Well, to use a football analogy, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Do you have anything that you wish to add about our development of offensive capabilities, offensive hypersonic capabilities?
Only that I know that it's been identified as a priority and it's being resourced at greater levels in our budget.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for your service. Admiral Davidson, North Korea has a variety of sources of illicit funding, and U.S. Indo-Pacific Command supports the enforcement of UN security resolution sanctions. I know you spoke to Mr. Carbajal a few minutes ago about sanctions enforcement, but can you speak to how Russia and China are living up to their responsibilities to do the same?
Well, I think in the diplomatic space, both Russia and China continue to try to undermine the sanctions effort by proposing relief to sanctions at the UN. But that's certainly not helpful in what I think should be the world's objective, to get to a denuclearized North Korea. I also believe that Russia kind of confounds our initiatives across the region by direct diplomatic engagements with other countries to garner the votes that they need to prevent these sanctions. I can tell you that China in the maritime space, using terrestrial sensors, using airborne sensors, they're watching how we do the sanctions enforcement regime. They're offering zero assistance. I can't say that they are preventing our ships and aircraft from doing their mission, but they're certainly not monitoring their own territorial seas very well, and they're not adding to the picture at all. And they continue, they continue to undermine the effort at the UN as well.
Thank you. So I guess along those same lines, you spoke earlier about how Russia plays a spoiler role in the region. Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics around that and what that entails?
There's one of the things that they tell other nations in the region is that our sea and our desire to maintain an open sea and airspace in the South China Sea, for example, it should not be our objective. Yet they use that same sea and airspace themselves and actually use the open seas and airways to, fly threatening bomber profiles to our allies, and in fact on the United States as well. I think that's a high form of hypocrisy. They're doing some engagements in the region where they're seeking to either gain access in a commercial fashion or in a science fashion that could lend itself to military capabilities. That's been upsetting. The good news there is that some of these other countries have at least called us and notified us of that. And they've made it, they've partnered with China in a large exercise last fall that was in Russia. They just are unhelpful in the whole of the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic space.
General Abrams or Mr. Schriver, do you have anything to add on that front?
Congresswoman, I will tell you that there is, we continue to see positive effects on the sanctions. Admiral Davidson briefed it earlier, but to reiterate what the Admiral said, the Chinese can and should do much, much more to meet their obligations in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions.
So what do you think this all kind of boils down to? What do you think the general effect is having, and what do we need to do about it from your end?
Well, China is attempting to undermine the rules-based international order to their own benefit or to the benefit of people or entities or regimes, frankly, that they seek to partner with. It's not helpful.
And same for Russia? Okay, so along those lines then, and we've made the president has made the decision to cancel U.S. participation in Key Resolve and Full Eagle. What message do you think ending those operational norms with the ROK well, the White House is saying we won't impose further sanctions on North Korea because of his relationship with Kim Jong-un. What do you think that message sends to, what message do you think that sends to our allies and partners in Asia and to Russia and China themselves?
Congresswoman, if I could, just to be precise, and this is not semantics, key resolve and full legal were not canceled. We have concluded that exercise regime that was in effect for about 35 years that was probably necessary, designed, optimized based on the situation on the peninsula vis-a-vis bellicose and aggressive and provocative behavior from the DPRK. We have since transitioned now in accordance with guidance from Secretary Shanahan and Minister of Defense Jung from the Republic of Korea in their statement. So we've concluded that previous exercise regime, and they've given us the green light to develop a new set of exercise regimes so that we can continue to meet and maintain our readiness requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe it was Chairman Smith who said during his opening statement that on the Korean Peninsula, we are at a high water mark since the cessation of conflict during the Korean War. I wanted to give General Abrams and Admiral Davidson an opportunity to reflect on how those improving conditions have manifested. What is the evidence that we see, and what do we expect from the trend lines as it relates to the overall status of conflict on the Korean Peninsula?
Congressman, if you go back just 2 years to 2017, during the height of missile tests, nuclear weapons tests by the DPRK, I would describe that, and I was not the commander then, but I was certainly watching very closely as the U.S. Army's force provider to have forces ready should crisis be required. I would characterize our posture and our stance as we were in a low crouch. We were increasing our stockages, increasing our force posture. We made the decision to deploy an additional very capable integrated air and missile defense system called THAAD. Things were very tense on the peninsula. People were at the low ready. Now, compare and contrast that, juxtapose that on to 2019, and there is a palpable air of calm on the peninsula. We're able to sustain and we continue to train and maintain our readiness, but simultaneously along the demilitarized zone, on the West Sea, the East Sea, along the northern limit line, inside the Joint Security Area, that for the first time since 1976, the Joint Security Area is now 100% demilitarized. All of that are evidence, I would say, of how I can say confidently that things have, the tension is reduced significantly.
Admiral Davidson, did you have anything to add to that?
No, sir, but I will add that the readiness of our forces are key in our mind, and we want to make sure that both the tactical forces and the operational level forces, the headquarters that coordinate between the United States and the Republic of Korea, all that training and readiness is sound. As General Abrams indicated earlier, we're keeping a close eye on any changes in the capability set, whether it's in conventional forces in North Korea, whether it's in nuclear, the potential for a nuclear test, and missile testing, and we'll be ready to respond if should those indicators say they're on a different trajectory than what General Abrams just described.
And Mr. Schriver, it seems to me that this new era of calm has been ushered in by an unprecedented level of engagement with the administration on the actors, the players, the chairman in North Korea. Have you drawn any conclusions about the actions that have been taken by the administration and the extent to which they've contributed to the new sense of calm that General Abrams articulated?
Well, I think the unprecedented step of meeting leader to leader has made this environment what it is. Ultimately, that...
And what it is safer, right?
Tensions are down, and I would describe it as safer in terms of avoidance of an immediate conflict, particularly one that's unintended or unwanted. We do need North Korea to take advantage of this environment and fulfill Chairman Kim's pledge to denuclearize.
And shifting gears briefly to hypersonics, Ms. Schriver, are we ahead or behind China in hypersonics now?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to give you a precise answer on that, other than I'm seized with a sense of urgency, as I believe our department is, that we need to invest on both the defense and the offensive side to make sure that our competitive advantages are maintained.
And what are the consequences if we don't? If we are demonstrably behind China in hypersonics going forward, how do you think that impacts the balance of power globally?
Increased risk and greater vulnerability for our ability to impact our security interests and our broad interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start with General Abrams. General Abrams, thank you very much for coming into my office yesterday. I appreciated the discussion. And I just want to start by saying that when your commander, our commander-in-chief, handed you a deck that meant you could not continue your prime exercises in this theater, I learned yesterday that you innovated remarkably and have improved upon the old exercises to modernize them, to make them more full spectrum, and to adapt to the current situation. And you deserve a lot of credit for that. I know that's not easy to do in the U.S. military, and I appreciate that very much. Admiral Davidson, you stated in your testimony that North Korea will remain the most immediate challenge until we achieve the final fully verifiable denuclearization as committed to by Chairman Kim Jong-un at the summit in June of 2018. AST Schriver, so we gave up the exercises. What did we gain from the summit?
I think we gained an opportunity to engage in a way that could be productive if North Korea is prepared to take the difficult steps in the direction of denuclearization.
That's an opportunity that didn't exist before?
I think leader-to-leader engagement did create an unprecedented opportunity. But North Korea has not taken the steps to fulfill Chairman Kim's pledge, and we're disappointed that they haven't come to the table in a serious manner.
Are you surprised?
Having worked on this in some form or another for almost 30 years, I think I've seen a lot of different approaches, none of which have been successful. I think this is the best opportunity that North Korea will ever have. Whether or not they make the strategic choice, that's difficult to say.
Why would they give up their nuclear weapons, Mr. Schriver?
I think there's a better path and a better future for the country, quite frankly, and I don't think their weapons are making them more secure. I think, it was only a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that we were at a period of very high tensions and possible military action. I don't think these weapons are making them more safe and secure.
So you talked about this, the fact that tensions are down, you said. My colleague just said there's a new level of calm. Have tensions ever been higher than they were at the beginning of this administration, when North Korea's hot-headed leader was exchanging tweets with ours?
We have had periods of heightened tension. I think 1994, Secretary Perry used to say that's the closest he came to war while he was Secretary of Defense.
Right, while he was Secretary. But has it ever been as dangerous as it was a couple years ago? I guess my point is that it's one thing to talk about tensions being down, but if you're just solving your own problem, the tensions that you created yourself, and as a result, we are where we were before in terms of negotiations, and that North Korea hasn't given up anything. We now know from public intelligence reports that they are actually continuing their nuclear weapons development, so they're farther along than they were at any time. Literally today, they are farther along than they have been at any time in American history. And all we gained after giving up our exercises is a quote-unquote opportunity that nobody is surprised that the chairman hasn't taken. Then where do you think this goes next? And what diplomatic leverage do we have at this point?
Yeah, the choice for North Korea is very clear, and it's a stark one. They can continue to live in isolation. They can continue.
I understand their choice. What leverage do we have?
Well, the maintenance of sanctions, I think, continues to put pressure on North Korea.
So you think sanctions are helpful?
I do.
So then why did the president just cancel the latest sanctions?
As I understand it, none of the sanctions have been removed or changed since the tweet. As the White House...
Since the tweet. So you would disagree with the idea of removing sanctions. That would be unhelpful.
I think it's helpful to maintain pressure. The decisions on future sanctions are beyond my purview.
Undoing pressure by tweet would not be helpful. I want to just shift focus for a second to India. You previously mentioned how important our relationship is with India. How does India's recent purchasing of the S-400 and the leasing of Russian nuclear submarines impact our relationship going forward?
The decision to procure S-400s has not been gone to contract or completed. We're very keen to see them make an alternative choice. We're working with them to provide potential alternatives. I think it would be an unfortunate decision if they chose to pursue that, and of course we have the legislation hanging over all of that. The legislation is not designed to be an impediment in the growing strategic partnership we have with India. It's designed to impose cost on Russia and consequence for Russia. So one way or another, we want to work through it because India is an important emerging strategic partner for us.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Time expires. Before I call Mr. Banks, we're going to do the classified hearing at 12:15. So we're going to be wrapped here before 12:15, no matter how many people are here. And we're going to go upstairs for the classified at 12:15. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Davidson, in the past you mentioned that Indo-PACOM only has a quarter of the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities required to address the range of threats in the AOR. For FY19, the CNO included sonobuoys on the Navy's unfunded priority list, and again in FY20, a portion of the funding request again appears in the UPL. In looking at your command's requirements in the current and foreseeable security environment, would you also include assets like sonobuoys as a critical ISR shortfall, especially in light of submarine activity in your AOR?
Yes, sir. Given the ongoing expansion of Chinese submarine operations in the Pacific and the Indo-Pacific, as well as new capability that the Russians will be introducing into the theater over the next couple of years with the Severdinsk-class cruise missile-capable submarine, sensing like sonobuoys, it's going up in value and need.
Thank you for that. Shifting gears, yesterday we had Secretary Shanahan in the same seat that you are in today. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the Secretary yesterday. Even if every Congress and President agree on the goal of a 355-ship fleet for decades to come, we will not reach the desired goal for at least, I said, 40 years yesterday without a firm commitment. The Secretary pushed back and said 18 years. I'll give the Secretary 18 years on the low end, and some experts say 40 years on the high end. In light of that, what do you expect the balance of forces between the U.S. and China to be by the time we achieve a 355-ship fleet? And when do you believe that it is realistic to achieve this goal?
To your first question, Congressman, I think we're going to lose our quantitative edge in about the 2025 timeframe. I think that's going to be a challenge for our equities in the region, absolutely. I can't comment on how much faster or slower the needs to happen here. There are some shipbuilding limits, the capacity in the United States to actually produce the ships. But I think the Navy's force structure assessment will take that fully into account as they come forward later in the year with it.
Thank you for that. Mr. Schriver, in your testimony, you said, quote, "There is an active North Korean effort to undermine sanctions and sow political division in their execution. North Korea has turned to the use of illicit ship-to-ship transfers off China's coast to evade caps on importing refined petroleum and the sale of textiles and coal. These restrictions were imposed and periodically strengthened as a result of North Korea's illegal weapons development activity dating back to March 2016, end quote. With that, what is the logic of the Trump administration considering lessening sanctions on North Korea and rewarding North Korea if they won't comply with the original sanctions to begin with?
Yeah, as I said, I'm not aware that sanctions have been removed or changed. I think it's very important to keep pressure on, and it's, I think, a defensible statement. We wouldn't be where we are today without the pressure that North Korea has felt. Your point about, well, quoting my statement about China, we will not be successful unless China does more to enforce sanctions themselves, including the activity in their territorial water, period.
Good. On that same note, Admiral, you've talked in the past about naming and shaming those entities that abet sanctions evasion in North Korea. Have we done that? Have we made any successful efforts to, at all, to minimize sanctions evasion?
There have been a number of flag states that the United States has engaged, and as well as other countries, to sideline vessels that have been participating in the illicit transfer of oil to North Korea, as well as some of the ownership companies and shippers involved. And I think the key is to disrupting that providing network as we go forward. But there has been engagement at the diplomatic level, to your point, naming and shaming of these individuals, and we have seen robust action from other countries in that regard.
So you have seen progress, or we hope to see progress?
Yes, sir. We have seen progress, and it will continue.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. I've heard a lot of questions and a lot of the ones that I was going to ask, so I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, if you would. I think Congresswoman Houlihan touched upon this a little bit, talking about Persian Gulf ports and China's presence in that part of the world, a little bit outside EUR-AO. But the national security strategy, national defense strategy does talk about reorienting ourselves for near-peer competition to include China. And I think a lot of people think of this only in military-to-military engagement, but you often talk about the economic aspects of all of this. And, I was curious, we haven't really talked about Afghanistan. I've been reading some reports about China starting to have a little bit of military-to-military cooperation with the Afghan national government. And, we certainly know that their relationship in Pakistan, thinking about One Belt, One Road and the port that they're developing there, their ability to drive into Afghanistan, get into Central Asia and the Gulf. There's ports in Iran. I think the success of those ports, figures largely in that region, in security in Afghanistan. So it's kind of the back door to your AOR. So just thought I'd give you an opportunity to talk about, as the U.S. talks in negotiations with Taliban, talks about withdrawing, what kind of a footprint do you hope to see in Afghanistan, and what kind of a role, how important it is to your area of responsibility that the U.S. is present and has a strong relationship with the Afghan government?
I think it's critical. We are in Afghanistan, first and foremost, to protect the United States and protect Americans. If Ambassador Khalilzad is successful in the efforts to promote reconciliation, it is expected that there would still be some terrorist threat that would remain. And I would hope that, it is our objective that through those negotiations that we have the latitude to maintain a presence sufficient for that terrorist threat that may remain. In a post-reconciled environment, we would expect the Afghans themselves to deal with the terrorist threat. They certainly don't want that on their territory, at least the government in Kabul. So it will be conditions-based, and I think that's being reflected in our negotiations.
Sir, if I could just add quickly, I mentioned earlier that I think our U.S. values compete extraordinarily well, and they do in Afghanistan very much so. And when you look at China's, what can only be said, incarceration of more than what's estimated to be right now, I think 1.5 million people in the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, I think Afghanistan would view heavy Chinese involvement in their country and Chinese interests as a chilling factor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you both, particularly your families, for it's a team effort to serve, and thank you for your years of service. I want to go back to India for a moment. I agree. I think it was the ranking member who said it's a seminal, or perhaps the chairman, really one of the seminal alliances, I think, moving forward. What more can we do in our engagement with India? What more should we be doing? What more would you like to do? And how can this body help?
Sir, the signing of the COMCASA and the 2+2 meeting that the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State had last September in India, I think is a breakthrough. Down at the operational level, we're working on an effort now to really operationalize the COMCASA. It's an agreement to, it's an IT essentially agreement in which underpinning that we can do some information sharing and other things. There's an opportunity for us to share tactical flyaway kits and an operational planning system that I think will advance our relationship on a military-to-military level very, very well. I continue to make the point with them that our interoperability and compatibility going forward is, will be advantaged with the purchase of U.S. systems. That allows us to get to training, doctrine, tactical level coordination that's really powerful. So while they very much want to protect their non-aligned policy, the tactical and technical capability we get out of like systems will really advance that relationship down in the military space. Randy?
Yep. Thank you. And just on top of that, switching to space, how does China's growing capability, anti-sat, dazzling, their capabilities that they're essentially putting all over the globe in terms of tracking through One Belt, One Road, and through their debt diplomacy, how is that affecting you operationally? I'd leave it open to anyone on the panel.
It's a capability development in the battle space that would have an effect on the freedom of action of the entire joint force, not only in the Indo-Pacific Command, but really around the globe.
Switching to switching to Japan, do you believe, Mr. Schriver, it's time, I understand this is an internal Japanese issue, it's a very contentious political issue in terms of Article 9, we're taking a hard look at cost sharing, growing Chinese capabilities, the U.S. can't do it alone, we're looking at losing a quantitative edge in terms of our fleet, as the Admiral just mentioned, by 2025. What can we do to talk to the Japanese about taking additional steps, taking that hard step internally and making those changes they need to their constitution to be a more effective military partner?
Well, you rightfully acknowledge it's a sovereign decision of the government of Japan and people there. I think the step to...
But they have a responsibility as an ally.
I think the step they took...
70-year construct now, and the world's changed.
I think the step they took to reinterpret Article 9 gave us greater flexibility and latitude, and we are taking advantage of that. Their new National Defense Program guidelines, when compared with our National Defense Strategy, revealed to us that there's nothing but open space for us to build this alliance out. I am not aware that the distinction between reinterpreting versus actually changing the Constitution is an impediment right now, but if it were to become one, we would certainly raise that with our Japanese friends.
Okay, just in the time I have remaining, Admiral, how does the Latin American angle, in terms of the 17 nations that you mentioned, participating, signing agreements, One Belt, One Road, how is that affecting your force laydown or force posture? Is it significant? What do we do going forward?
All those countries are actually in Southcom's area of responsibility. Right. I actually talked to Admiral Fowler just last night to make sure that I understood, and he wanted to understand my concerns as well. I think you're not seeing profound military action in the Southcom AOR right now. Last year, China did run a hospital ship down there with some medical capability.
Though I would note, just in my time remaining, I do understand they put a satellite tracking system in Argentina on land lease. So it's a road it's a trend we're seeing. And
we've seen other requests across the Indo-Pacific AOR, but the net result of which is the potential for more bases, places for China to operate out of base airplanes, fixed ships.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion upstairs. Ms. Loria, and when she's done, we're going to reconvene in 2212.
Well, thank you for being here today, and Admiral Davidson, it's especially good to see you again. I spent 4 years in the Western Pacific on a destroyer and then as the aide at 7th Fleet, so I'm familiar with the area, and what's most striking is the large distances that have to be covered. And I want to focus today especially on our challenges to do with logistics based off of those large distances in the Pacific. And our current Navy logistics enterprise is based on the ability to deliver fuel, parts, supplies in an uncontested environment. So I appreciate that you also see this as a vulnerability in your comments that you provided in preparation for the hearing. While China continues to develop weapons such as the DF-26, they've called it the Guam killer, which gives you an idea of the range and what they could intend to use that for, that threaten our ability to deliver logistics from the fixed bases we've relied on for more than 50 years. But we really haven't changed our tactics or procedures with regards to logistics and practiced those very recently, such as console ops with our TAOs in theater for about a decade. So do you see logistics as an Achilles heel in the Pacific theater?
Certainly advancements with our logistics tactics, so to speak, is important going forward. We actually have done some console ops here in the last 5 years. We just concluded the Pacific Blitz exercise as well, which merges essentially what was a tactical exercise and a logistics, both Navy Marine Corps exercises, to exercise that capability. Clearly, recapitalization of our sea lift system is going to be critically important as it's aging out and really has propulsion plants that are, expiring in capability and our ability to maintain them.
I was going to comment on that as well, because we had the opportunity to hear from Admiral Busby as the Maritime Administrator, as well as from U.S. Transcom, and we focused within the Sea Power Subcommittee as well on the age of the sea lift fleet, and on any given day, if say 50% of the sea lift fleet were unavailable, what kind of impact would that have? Because when we were briefed, that was basically what was unavailable at a snapshot in time. What impact would that have on your most limiting O plan and ability to carry that out within the theater?
It's a risk to our troops and all of our people that are forward in the region if there is any delay in our ability to deliver the logistics in accordance with the O plans.
And going back to the console ops and the availability of tankers within the region, currently in our MSP program, there are no tankers whatsoever. And do you see that as a need in order to execute your most pressing O plan?
Yes, ma'am. The Military Sea Lift Command is also exploiting commercial opportunities to do some of these things as well.
And lastly, many of our ships in the theater are heavily reliant on shore infrastructure, such as in Guam and Yokosuka and Sasebo and different areas around the theater. Are you taking any actions to harden that shore infrastructure or provide additional defenses for it to make sure that we can maintain the logistics necessary to carry out our two principal O plans within the area?
Yeah, certainly there are defensive capabilities in Guam I would like to see improved. We're using a mobile system right there now with THAAD on the ground, as well as ship support from the threats that are extant. I think in the future we are going to need a more robust fixed site there so that our mobile sites can then be employed to support our expeditionary logistics and other basic needs around the region.
Well, and I'll wrap up by asking you the same question that I've asked all combatant commanders who've come before us is, on a different note, what percentage of your requested carrier presence have you received within the theater over the last 2 years?
It's about 70%.
Well, thank you, and as I'm the last to go today, I wanted to thank you all again for taking the time to brief us and help us be more informed on our decision-making process throughout the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your testimony, answering questions. We are adjourned, and we'll reconvene in 2212 as soon as we can get up there.